I want to be Kevin Marr because I want to live in a place where he's got a man cave. He's got two televisions. He's got signed helmets. He's got all sorts of sports memorabilia behind him. But since I can't, I guess I'll interview him. He joins me today. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio. And Kevin is currently the president editorial director at Cherry Creek Magazine, but he has a long history in sports television, was with Fox for many years. So it will be fun diving into the archives of his career and looking at what he has done. So let's start here, Kevin, because you told me that you were an intern with Fox Sports Net at the time. How did that transformation happen from you going to Santa Clara University and then getting on with Fox initially?
It all started at Santa Clara. I went there for a few reasons. One was they had a student radio station. This was back in the early 90s. And I got into some other schools with bigger athletic departments. And with more successful football teams comes an actual radio station that's going to be covering them in a way that I wasn't going to be able to be a part of. So if that makes sense, Santa Clara, their own radio station. My goal in life was to be on air, and for me, that was a proving ground. So I joined the radio station at KSCU in Santa Clara, up in the San Jose area, and for 4 years, did a radio show, both music-wise. This is when Nirvana and Pearl Jam and not Jane's Addiction, Alice in Chains was coming out, so it was a fun time for music. But also through sports, I became the sports director my junior year, managed 12 or 13 people, and was responsible for all of the on-air content, whether it was sports shows, basketball play-by-play. The football team was still alive before they canned the program in my sophomore year. Women's soccer back then, we were a big deal, which I didn't really touch, but I found some guys who could really handle the soccer duties well. This was back when they were flirting with national championships. Brandy Chastain, who everybody remembers from the U.S. women's team goal, the Rose Bowl, she was there at the time. Basketball was my thing. That was the play-by-play for that. We were in the West Coast Conference. So you're talking about, at the time, Gonzaga was not a big deal. It was your Pepperdine's and your LMU's. But we had a little-known freshman named Steve Nash, who
Yes.
would eventually be turning a lot of heads. So the experience there with the radio was fantastic. And it led me to go up to San Francisco, intern at KNBR, which is a huge station. They were doing Giants baseball, Warriors basketball. I remember it was Chris Webber's rookie year with the Warriors. So a lot of exciting things going on up there. Basically, Brian, I was building my arsenal. I knew that the more I could accomplish in college, I could then take in hopes of breaking in somewhere nationally. I'm an LA native, so I moved back to Los Angeles, and I immediately signed up or applied for an internship at Prime Ticket, which at the time, Prime Ticket was your local Los Angeles, Southern California sports network. It wasn't even 24 hours. It was maybe 18 hours of content. And they did Lakers home games, LA Kings games, surfing, mountain biking, and kind of a poor man's sports center called Press Box. But it was actually really impressive. It was an hour long. I met some amazing people there who would end up becoming the foundation of Fox Sports in a couple of years. But it was Prime Ticket the year I got there. And then they got sold to Liberty Media, and Liberty Media turned it into Prime Sports, which all of a sudden became national. All of a sudden, Prime Sports was covering 13 NHL teams and a dozen NBA teams. And very soon after that, Rupert Murdoch came across it and said, "What is Prime Sports? Why don't I own it? I'm going to buy it." He did. 1996 came, and that was the launch of Fox Sports Net. And so I was in the right place at the right time. I did enough to make the cut to go from Prime Sports to this great new opportunity at Fox Sports Net. And that's where really a very exciting time for Fox Sports in its history. prior to that, you had the NFL and I don't think they had Major League Baseball, but this really grew them. And their whole idea there was, we're going to compete with ESPN, but in a different way. We're going to be regional. And so from there, it really took off. And I was a production assistant coming into this brand new world and a huge new network.
Who you mentioned this, that you worked initially when you began with Fox with what would become some of the big names that have been a foundation of the network today and that people know of as some of the godfathers, if you will. Who were some of those people you worked with that you have now seen go through the ranks at Fox and become as big as they've become?
Well, John Entz, who's no longer at Fox, he has started a new company with some super talented sports producers and professionals in the industry. John Entz, though, he was a ESPN transplant, and that's what happened. You had the prime sports group that was already in LA, and then you had a bunch of great professionals from ESPN who said, I'd rather live in LA than Bristol,
Yeah.
Connecticut any day of the year. So let's go do that. So there's that combination. John Entz was the most successful, the most intelligent, probably the biggest impact I had. You had Eric Weinberger, who went on to NFL Network. Mike Mariano, who I've known for years back at Prime Ticket, is now, I think, the coordinating producer at NFL Network. He replaced Eric. Who else did you have? A lot of guys at the time who have ended up at NFL Network or ESPN or are out of the business entirely. But David Hill was overseeing everything.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Scott Ackerson was somebody I knew of, but he didn't have his hands in Fox Sports Net at the beginning. But it was a who's who now that you start looking at it, of both producers, directors, also talent. I mean, Brian, it was a lot of trial and error. They'd never done anything like this. And up until that point, it was ESPN and nothing. So you saw a lot of different people coming in and a lot of different shows being launched, and hey, what works, what doesn't. They threw a lot of money into this, and it was great to be a part of because nothing was half-assed about it. Everything from the medical insurance that we got. I remember very early on, the Blue Cross or Blue somebody came in to talk to everybody, and they said, we're really excited to talk to you about this medical plan because nobody gets this medical plan. This is fantastic. Fox is really, taking care of you guys. It's just things like that. Editors, I mean, as many editors as you would need. Now, look at the landscape today. You got predators. You do everything. Back in the day, I'd go into an edit bay and say, hey, this is what we're doing. Go here, go there. And there was just everything at our disposal. Sure. But it was, and I know I'm forgetting some people, but the people that I am still in contact with, Todd Mossberg over at NFL Network, Christian Anderson, who is the producer over at KTTV Channel 11 in LA. You should interview him. That guy's
okay. I would love to do that. That'd be fun.
Amazing. John Kaplan, Alan Flowers.
I had Alan Flowers on. He came on. He was awesome.
Flo is amazing. Bardia Shirais, who's over, I think, still at Fox. There are a lot of guys who, they were pulling their weight and doing what they needed to do, and they stayed in the industry and they did it well, and so they are where they are now. And it's great for me to be able to see what they're doing and keep in contact with them. But there are a lot of all-stars on that team. There's a lot of talent that ended up really reshaping the way we watch television. And it was really impressive. It was fun to be around.
When you think back at those infant stages of Fox and how they were trying to compete with ESPN, and like you said, nobody had really tried to challenge ESPN, and here comes Fox. And while it certainly looked to be an uphill battle, with you being in the front lines of all of this and Fox trying to compete, what do you think that what was one thing you think they did better than ESPN, even in the early stages as Fox was trying to learn their niche and where they can really take on ESPN?
Because of the regional blueprint where they wanted to start on the East Coast, and then as the hours lapsed into the evening, they'd work their way out west. Everybody was working so hard. We were doing what, 7 or 8 shows a night starting at 3 o'clock. So there wasn't a lot of downtime. It was a lot of uh, there was just a lot of coordination. And so everybody was busy. I think that put us in a good spot to learn and to do our jobs well and to really get a feel for what it was like, quick turnarounds and things like that. You had Jason Wormser on not too long ago, and he talked so much about, hey, things can happen on live television. It's live television. We were doing live television for 7, 8 hour segments. And so I don't think ESPN did that much back in the day. If I remember, they had like a 6 p.m. Eastern Sports Center and then an 11 o'clock, I think. But I know everybody at Fox was working their ass off because there was so much to do from one show to the next. Maybe the show that you did for New York was going to be different for the one you did for Chicago or Dallas or Los Angeles. So you had to re-edit things and redo things. And it was a great fire drill that I think for the most part was done very well.
We are joined with Kevin Marr, talking sports television with him. I'm Bryan Fenley. How did you find yourself working for Jim Rome, and how did that turn in your career work?
John Entz was his executive producer. Now, this was Jim's, I believe, first real television show. We know how we all met Jim, which was pissing off Jim Everett years before, right? I mean, oh my gosh. And I was a Rams
Classic.
fan. So I was like, what are you doing? Jim became a legend in radio, and Fox ended up picking him up, I think 98 or 99, The Last Word, which I thought was a really good show. I think Jim is one of the great interviewers of all time. I have a ton of respect for that. John Entz was producing his show, and he came to me and he said, hey, I want you to come on board as a feature producer. I'm like, really? With Rome? And he's like, yeah, what's wrong? I'm like, dude, it's Rome, it's Jim Everett. It's like, I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way at the time. I mean, picked a fight with Jim Everett over calling him Chris. I wasn't sure about it. John's like, give him a chance because I think you'll be surprised. Now, John had never steered me wrong before. I said, you know what? Let's do it. Jim Rome is the nicest guy and the best boss I have ever had. Loyal, polite, cool guy who it was the best decision I ever made. And it was special, Bryan, because the team was less than 6 people. And so for the years leading up to that, I was a part of a team of 50. When you start considering all the producers and the directors and graphic design and all this, but to be able to work on a smaller unit with Jim and John Entz and Laura Marcus, who you've interviewed, who I've known for years.
Oh, yes. He's awesome.
It was a lot of fun. It gave me more responsibility. It gave me more creativity, more travel time, which was a lot of fun for me. I was in my mid-20s at the time. So, I want to go out and experience some of this stuff. And so we were doing a lot of things separate of what was going on at Fox Sports News that really allowed me to work on my game. And like I said, be more accountable in some ways for larger projects. And I loved Jim. I worked with, and you have to remember at the time, remember these lists that maybe they still do come out, the most powerful people in sports? I forget who puts that out, but back in 1998, 1999, I don't think there was a more powerful on-air talent in sports than Jim Rome. And so there was a lot going on around the show. And we were getting guests and we were getting opportunities that you just weren't getting really anywhere else in the country. And so for any of these, what's the name of the band? Blink 182. They did
Yes.
that. What's my age again? Where they're all running naked through all these different scenes. Do you remember that video?
I probably saw it back in the day.
Okay.
I do. Yeah.
It's a great song, and the video at the very end, they're running through all these different shows, and the very last show is Jim's. And so the guys from Blink 182 came in the studio to film that. I'm right off camera, and they're talking to Jim because they want to surprise him. Now, two out of the three the guys had skin-colored underwear on. Okay, I think it was Mark who didn't have any underwear on. And so they had the set manager, the stage manager, talking to Jim. So when they filmed the guys walking through, it was a very natural reaction from Jim that he wasn't expecting. So Travis Barker and Tom walk through with their skin-colored underwear, and Mark's the last guy, and he's got nothing on. So when you watch that video and you see Rome go, oh, I mean, that is a legitimate, authentic reaction. And it's just stuff like that. Blink 182 and just all sorts of stuff that was going on with Jim at the time was exciting to be around. It allowed me to do what I felt I did best, which was writing features, quick turnarounds. Before I had signed on with Jim, my forte really was the early show. We'd come in at 9 o'clock in the morning for Fox Sports News, and we'd go over, it's usually with Todd Mossberg or Lou Cook, we'd go over, okay, we're gonna do a feature today. We do one every day. It's gonna be, 5-6 minutes long. What's it gonna be? It's gotta be relevant. It's gotta be today, whatever. And so I had 5 hours to put together a legitimate feature every day of the week. And if that's not throwing somebody into the deep end and making them learn how to swim, I don't know what is, but it was great. I mean, as you know, working in sports television, you got to know about every sport. You have to know what's going on. You need to be able to know just as much about Michael Jordan back then as you do about Lance Armstrong or Tony Gwynn or whoever. So you never knew what was going to be the topic of the day. But it's okay, run down to the vault, get as much video as necessary, find the right sound bites, write it, get it voiced, and then go into the room with one of the editors, fantastic editors who can turn that stuff around like that. And then you've got, running it down the hall at 3:12 to make it. And that's what I was tasked with doing once I got to Rome's show, was the same kind of thing. A lot of fun.
If you were to take one of those features and the one that you go to where you're like, if I could put this into like a memento, like one of the helmets behind you so I could show off, what is that one feature that you would go back to?
Oh, I don't know. I did so many of them. And, back then, Fox was so different in that they had these, they weren't beta tapes, Bryan. They were like a special kind of tape that nobody else had. And so I was putting all of my work on those. And I still have them. And I've got to find a way to transfer them onto something circa 2021. I don't know that I can do that. But I remember doing a Lance Armstrong feature that got a good amount of applause. And I probably have to point fingers at the editor for that one. It's a team thing. I mean, you're only as good as who you're working with. I have been saved by editors, and I got suspended because of what an editor did. It was a Super Bowl in Houston. I think that sounds right. And Keith Olbermann had done the track, and we had everything going. It was a huge turnaround because they were live. They're on site. They send like 10 minutes worth of stuff that you got to turn around and clean up and cross the T's and dot the I's and then get it on air in the next 15 minutes. Well, we did that. But back in the day, this machine went crazy on me. I didn't get a chance to watch it all the way through. I only had a chance to put it together and get it on there. And about 5 minutes into it, it rewound and started over on air. And they're like, dude, what happened? I'm like, dude, I don't know. I mean, okay, well, you get a couple of days off to think about it. I'm like, great, I'm going to go hike in Palisades. I don't know what to tell you. Um, and they were cool about it in the end. It was just, Bryan, back in those days when we first launched, we had 4 executive producers in 4 years. It was not a polished project. And we were still looking for, like, in my opinion, some legitimate leadership. And so you had people coming and going that had different ideas on how they wanted to run Fox Sports Net and Fox Sports News and things like that. Imagine being a quarterback and having 4 different offensive coordinators in 4 years, and everybody's wondering, well, how come you're not playing better? But that's not an excuse on me or anybody else. It was just, when you launch something like that, right, you're going to go through some growing pains, and again, trial and error. So I didn't mind that suspension. I didn't do anything wrong, but I paid tribute in acknowledging and recognizing everybody that makes something get on air, whether it's the graphic department, the stage managers, producers, directors. I mean, it is a team effort. So anything I got any kind of accolades for, I was quick to understand, hey, you know what? That's just the team that we put together.
Speaking of someone who's gotten a lot of accolades, Von Miller's personal chef. And I'm curious how you coordinated and got to know him or her, and how that became a thing.
Well, what I'm doing now, after I left Fox Sports, and we can come back to it, but my wife and I launched our own media, a boutique media and publishing company out here in Denver. And at first we did, look, after Fox, I went to Xerox for 3 years and I learned sales. It was just another idea I had of increasing the arsenal. The idea was to come back to sports, but perhaps at a management position or something else. I felt I needed to learn sales, and I felt that I got as much as I wanted to learn on the television side. But when I was at Xerox, they said, hey, if you pay attention to this world-renowned training we're going to give you, you can start your own company. I'm going to be selling copiers forever. And I did. And I was there for 3 years, and then met my wife, and we launched a company. And it started with a high-end lifestyle luxury women's magazine, which she knows plenty about. And just by chance, between her and me, we have all of the skill sets we need to put that thing together. At the time, I was doing strictly sales, because what do I know about women's beauty and health and that sort of thing? But what it led into, after a couple of years of really being successful with it, was an offshoot with a men's magazine called Sir and Sport, which we're no longer doing. We did 2 issues a year for 4 years. I wrote every sentence of a magazine that was 100 pages, sold all the ads, and it was a great men's magazine. Honestly, it's probably the proudest thing I've ever done in my life, was putting this thing together. And it really was rooted by my experience at Fox and by Prime. I mean, I have a good eye for how things should look. We all should at this point. If you're producing, you know what looks good, you know what doesn't. And so whether it's horizontal versus vertical, whether it's color schemes, whether it's just a good idea coming up. So as far as Von Miller's chef, how did I even know you had a chef? It must have been something I came across on social media. And I'm like, I want to interview this guy. And his name's Curtis Bell. He's no longer Von's chef. He went on to do something else. He's another athlete's chef. But and I called him Von's Dinner Bell. And we got to know each other. He's super talented. He went to Culinary Institute of America, where all of your top chefs end up going. He worked up in Vail at a really ritzy restaurant. And he realized, hey, you know what? This isn't for me. I don't want to work in a restaurant anymore. And he got out of the business altogether. And then through a mutual friend, he was asked if he wanted to maybe cook privately. And so he did. And he worked with Vaughn for several years. And we just got to hang out. And so, yeah, it's great meeting people like that. Another guy named Keith Bishop, who used to block for John Elway back in the day, a 10-year offensive guard, made a Pro Bowl or two. He retired after 10 years, Bryan, and then went into the DEA for 20 years. This guy was breaking up drug raids. He was back in Iraq. And when I found out about this, I interviewed him about that. And there are certain things he couldn't talk about because they were just, I mean, the stuff you see is just crazy. We hit it off. He's 20 years my senior. We went fly fishing last year. And, you know, so it's just stuff like that where kind of the people, I'm still in sports media, certainly not to the extent of what I was doing between 1994 and 2003, but now more local stuff with the Broncos, the Avalanche. There's a great sports agent out who resides in Denver named Peter Schaefer. He reps guys like Barry Sanders and Joe Thomas and a couple other Hall of Famers, as well as obviously current NFL players.
Sure.
But he and I have become friends. He's the reason I got 2 TVs behind me. I went into his man cave and I'm like, oh my God. I go, how do you set this up? He's like, you got to have 2. You got to have at least 2. And I said, well, how does that work with a controller and stuff like that? So I credit Peter Schaefer for the TV situation because, hey, you know, I don't get down here enough. I've got 2 kids under the age of 3. And so this is my hideaway, but especially with football season, you have as much going on as I can.
Besides,
that's how I ended up. That's how I ended up meeting Von Miller's.
Okay.
Chef.
Besides Schaefer, what's the best man cave you've ever seen?
Oh, actually, my man cave's better than Schaefer's. He just had 2 TVs, and Barry Sanders' Heisman.
Yeah, let's throw that in there.
It was his Heisman or the NFL Rookie of the Year award, something like that. You know what? What's the best man cave I've seen in person?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that I've seen a better one.
How about one that you've seen not in person?
Oh, you know what? No, I know who. Derek Wolfe, former,
sure. Yeah.
former Bronco defensive end, now with the Ravens. I interviewed Derek. I put him on the cover of Sur and Sport, and I went to his house to interview him. That dude, all the NFL guys have good man caves. I mean, this thing is a few hundred square feet. His was a whole basement.
Wow.
So he had the bar, he had the pool table, he had the full-on gym, a little lounge area, and then an outside area too. That was kind of the center of the home. And Derek Wolfe, a bunch of jerseys on the wall. You know, he's a Cincinnati Bearcat. So he had Travis Kelce up there, and his brother too. And then a bunch of other jerseys of players he's met and played with and stuff like that. So yeah, Derek Wolfe had a pretty cool man cave for sure.
Give us a sense of what you're doing right now and how you want to perhaps in your future do more in sports media.
You know, I was supposed to interview Shelby Harris, the Broncos, in a couple of days, but his calendar wouldn't really allow for it. You know, he just got re-signed to $27 million. You know what George Payton has done with the Broncos since coming over from Minnesota and becoming the GM. You know, he's really infused a lot of excitement into this Bronco team. And the reason I mention this is because there are few and far between as far as sports interviews that I'm doing these days. What we're doing now is Cherry Creek Magazine. Cherry Creek is a very affluent area in Denver. It's 16 blocks of shopping and restaurants and hotels. And so we've combined the women's magazine that we did and Sir in Sport, and we've made it a unisex publication and platform that really caters to that audience, which includes more than sports. You know, I got to test drive the new Lamborghini Urus SUV for 4 days last month, and so we wrote about that. We try and get some testosterone in there with traveling and fly fishing and things like that. Where this goes with sports, you know, it's ironic, Brian, because nowadays we have more at our disposal to be able to launch our own sports brand, you know, with a podcast or a cell phone or whatever it might be. But I still think it's probably more difficult than ever to do so, depending on your backing, depending on, you know, who's sponsoring it and who you are in the world today. I would love to get back into some kind of on air. Uh, I shouldn't say get back in because I was never on air. You know, a lot of the people at Fox, their goals, some of their goals was to get on air
Sure.
and to use that as a stepping stone. I remember I got a job offer in Pocatello, Idaho, to be their sports guy in 1996, 97, something like that. I'm like, I'm going. Absolutely. That's where you start, right? And the television station got bought out for like an all Mexican this, that, or the other thing. So it wasn't what it was
Oh,
before that. So that kind of fell by the wayside. I'm like, that's fine. I'm having plenty of fun writing and producing and working with guys like Rome and Keith Olbermann and stuff like that. But I did a Sir and Sport podcast. It was fun. I did a couple of episodes, and I would like to get back into that. But there's so many hours in the day, and there's so much competition that I think I'd have to look at it more as a hobby and something that, hey, you know what? If it takes off, great, but I can't expect that. I still eat, sleep, all sports. I can talk just about anything that's going on in basketball, football, baseball, hockey to a degree. And so I'm sharp on that, but it's interesting. I don't know if I'll get back into sports in the way that I would like. Uh, you know, we do stuff for the Colorado Buffaloes. I did a really fun 30th anniversary of their national championship. And so I got to interview guys like Alfred Williams and Darian Hagan and Eric Bieniemy and who am I forgetting? A few of the other guys. You know, I've got a nice relationship with the athletic director up there, or the sports athletic director. So he set all this up, and so on occasion I'll be able to do something Colorado based. I'd like to relaunch Sir and Sport at some point. It was a great magazine. It didn't lose money. It just wasn't making enough for me to justify all the work that I was putting into it. But if you looked on the newsstands, it was right next to your GQs
yeah.
and your Men's Health, and it was a national looking magazine. I'll put that up against anybody's in the country. I mean, it was well done, and I really attribute Fox Sports for being able to come up with those kinds of ideas and doing that well. But I mean, that's an answer I don't know about. I don't know how I can get back into sports more than what I'm doing right now. But I mean, you never know, right?
You never know. And what I do know is that Kevin Marr is creative and he will find a way to always have sports close to him, doing something to inject his creativity in sports media. I look forward to seeing what is in store for you in your future. Kevin Marr, it has been a pleasure going through your career at Fox, looking at what you're doing now, all the stories from Jim Rome and beyond. I'm Bryan Fenley. This was a lot of fun, man. I really, really appreciated this. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me. And congratulations on everything you're doing with your platform. It's amazing.